Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the afternoon program of Day 2 Africa Week. My name is Marina Diboma. I'm the Deputy Managing Director at the Netherlands African Business Council, and I'm very proud and honored to moderate this high-level political panel of the Socialists and Democrats Group Africa Week 2020. Our topic will be how to identify socio-political and economic priorities to address the challenges of inequalities in the perspective of the COVID-19 pandemic. You will listen to various keynote addresses, which will be followed by a panel discussion with insightful guest speakers. And the audience is very much encouraged to ask questions via the live feed through Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter channels. Without any further ado, I would like now to give the floor to the President of Socialists and Democrats Group, Ms. Irache Garcia Perez, for her opening speech. Welcome.
Thank you. We need to strengthen our European ties with Africa. We do this to face the current crisis and also to promote economic development in the two continents that must be sustainable, fair, and make use of the new digital technologies. Last March, the European Commission put forward a new strategy with Africa. Now, we must come up with concrete initiatives. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the summit between the African Union and the European Union planned for the end of October have to be postponed. Therefore, even more than expected, the S&D Group Africa Week represents an excellent opportunity to reflect upon our common goals and objectives for the next decade. The 21st century should be a century of Africa. It is a continent with a great potential, and I am not only speaking about natural resources, but most of all about its people. While Europe is aging, Africa is mainly a very young continent. Today, its population is nearly 1.3 billion, and according to the United Nations, it will reach 2.5 billion in 2050 and more than 4 billion by the end of the century. We are neighbors and also natural partners. As a Spaniard, I am very well aware of how close we are in many respects. We need to strengthen the cooperation at the European level, going beyond bilateral agreements. Also, the COVID pandemic marks a turning point for our cooperation. Africa seems to be less affected in terms of death by the pandemic. The WHO says 26,000 deaths in early October compared to 230,000 in Europe. However, we have all been hit by the global economic consequences of the lockdowns and the reduction of economic activity as well as tourism. Like us, Africa has been hit hard by the economic and social consequences of the crisis. It faces the effects of sanitary restrictions on the local economy, especially on agriculture, the drop in exports of raw materials, and major part of its economy, the collapse of international tourism and the decline in transfer for emigrants due to the difficulties encountered in the developed countries. Africa faces all of this at the same time. The International Monetary Fund forecasts that the economy will contract by 3.2% in Sub-Saharan Africa in 2020, representing the worst recession in a quarter of a century. The economic downturn has had a strong impact on other challenges. According to the World Food Programme, 270 million people are now at risk of famine due to the pandemic, mainly in Africa. In addition to the pandemic, the locust plague in Eastern Africa and the effects of climate change will cause the worst humanitarian crisis since the Second World War. We cannot allow the COVID-19 pandemic to become a pandemic of hunger. For this reason, the capacity of the European Union to support Africa, despite our own difficulties, will be essential for the future of our relationship. With the program Team Europe, the Union and its member states have already mobilized around 8 billion euros in Africa. In particular, 5.5 billion went to sub-Saharan Africa. The financial support was mainly assigned to protective equipment and health centers. In the face of COVID-19, long-term solutions can only come from a vaccine. The vaccine raised risk, increasing both inequalities among countries and geopolitical tension. By participating in the COVAX facility together with the World Health Organization, we are campaigning for a multilateral solution to facilitate access to the vaccine for all, and in particular to benefit low and middle-income countries. We are also taking the global lead in the relief and cancellation of the external debt of the most indebted countries. The European Union and its member states have actively supported the suspension of debt payments at the G20 and the Paris Club. We will continue to work toward extending this suspension beyond 2020. However, it is not enough. Many countries continue to pay more for their external debt than for the health of their citizens. That is why we believe it is necessary to restructure the external debt. These actions are essential in the short term, but the future of the continent also depends on the Africa's ability to strengthen their institutions and cope with the arrival of 30 million young people on the labour market every year. We cannot afford to work together with our African partners so that the economic recovery can be sustainable in both Africa and Europe, making good use of our natural resources and benefiting the working people, not only big companies. We need fair economic growth that will contribute to human development. Together, we must try to stop global warming, cooperating with the multilateral institution. If we do not take timely actions, water scarcity and desertification will produce new conflicts, and people will be forced to leave their homes. This is a threat we can already see in the south of Europe. At the same time, the transition to a circular and low-carbon economy will be essential to combat the ecological crisis that is threatening humanity today. Africa has a strong potential in terms of sustainable agriculture, solar energy, biomass, and hydroelectricity. We should all make the most of these new technologies. Africa has already made huge progress in recent years. The use of mobile payment system has allowed an important part of the population, including young and women, to overcome the difficulties of access to traditional banking service. The setup of African companies, especially in this sector, must contribute to the economic growth of the continent. Finally, we also propose to strengthen our ties in the field of culture and education to guarantee a better and mutual understanding. But above all, we must listen to what you, African leaders and African citizens, have to say. It must to be a two-way conversation that is a real partnership. I also hope to hear many women's voices in this conversation, because we cannot leave every important decision to half of the population. Women, please have your say. Every voice deserves to be heard. Just like the European Union is made up of 27 member states, and we try to be united in diversity, so is Africa. even more diverse, with 54 countries, with a different history, a rich culture, with many languages, tradition, and specific challenges. So only by an honest exchange based on trust can we develop a true partnership in which both can grow and work together for a better world. That is what all of us here want to achieve. And I sincerely hope that this Africa Week will make a major contribution to the next EU-Africa Summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Perez, for introducing us to the topic. Now, I have the honor and delight today to present our first keynote speaker in the form of an exclusive interview. He's a human rights activist whose commitment to human dignity, women's rights, and respect for the physical integrity of women's body has led to death threats on his life. His colleagues and him at the Panzi Hospital gave medical attention and psychological support to women and girls who have been main victims of a brutal campaign of mass sexual violence by armed rebel groups in the DRC. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to present the exclusive interview conducted by journalists for Euronews, Isabel da Silva, with world-renowned gynecologist, human rights activist, winner of the Sakharov Prize in 2014 and the Nobel Peace Laureate Prize in 2018, Mr. Dr. Denis Mukwege. Let's watch the interview.
Merci, Dr. Mukwege, de nous rejoindre.
Dr. Mukwege, thank you for joining us from Bukavu, capital of province of South Kivu in DRC. What was the impact of COVID-19 on the work of the Panzi Foundation and your hospital for providing physical and psychological and treatments to women? Well, the hospital is not only about treating physical damages, but we have a holistic approach with 4 pillars: a medical pillar, a psychological pillar, a equal pillar, and a socio-economic pillar. It is this pillar that suffered most during the COVID-19 pandemic because there was a slowing down of our economic activities. So all these women who were living with small amounts from their income-generating activities, we see them back today, coming back to us and asking for a new support to start their business again. When women are not economically self-supporting, when they are very poor, they become also more vulnerable to sexual violence. As there is less mobility due to the pandemic, could you see any changes in terms of cases coming to the hospital? Well, in fact, we have seen an increase of children's rape of children. It could be explained because children, at the time being, as they do not go to school, parents are perhaps more concerned in finding a way to treat and feed them, so children are left on their own. They are more exposed to rape. And the number of children that were treated during this pandemic was higher than usual. You are working against the impunity of crimes of rape as weapons of war. Why do you advocate for the creation of an international tribunal? There were hundreds of women raped in one single night. It was systematic rapes. We could see babies, old people, even men who were raped. And today, the perpetrators of these crimes are known and they are left unpunished. They are either nationals or foreigners. And at the time I'm speaking, there are foreign armed groups that are still perpetrating crimes in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We tried responding by weapons, by negotiation, by peace agreement. Nothing worked. The only element we didn't use is justice. An international tribunal for Congo can deal with the big fish, so to speak, but we also need mixed specialized chambers throughout the Republic. The objective for us is not only for the population to know the truth and to be able to say never again. How does the Global Survivors Fund work? You created it 1 year ago to fund reparation project for sexual violence survivors, for the care of victims of sexual violence, especially on the medical and psychosocial aspect. We have constant support from the European Union. The objective of this global fund is to support reparation projects, repairing projects in the country, because we believe that if women are courageous, brave enough to file a pathologic complaint, they should not be discouraged afterwards because of an absence of reparation. I think that if women have the courage to overcome their suffering and to lodge a complaint, it is our duty, the duty of humanity, to help them going to the end. And going to the end means helping them healing, and this cannot be done without justice and reparation. The European Union and African Union intend to launch a new partnership in 2021. What should be the priorities for actions in the most affected countries as Congo? Development cooperation for common political interests between Europe and Africa, and a broader cooperation on migration issues, climate change, peace and security are very noble objectives. And I think that the biggest problem today is the implementation of strategies which is suffering. When you are not working for peace and security in Africa, what happens? Well, young people have no hope, and they tend to take the path of migration with all the consequences for Africa, because there is a brain drain, which is very important. And in Europe, we can see that migration leads to a right of extremisms, which is not a good thing. And somewhere in between, there's everything that's going on in the Mediterranean Sea, where several dozens of young African people are dying, and it's definitely not the pride of our humanity. People call you Dr. Miracle, but you continue to being threatened. What's your daily life today? Well, we hope we will be able to do our work of supporting women, but we see the future without all those rapes. And for us, ending the violence that women are suffering would be the climax of our work. This is exactly what we aspire to. We aspire to be Congolese women able to go cultivating their field, going and find wood or do what they need to do without fearing of being raped. Thank you very much, Dr. Mukwege, for your participation in the global conversation.
Welcome back. That was an exclusive interview between journalist Isabel da Silva and Dr. Denis Mukwege. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a very insightful one. We would have loved to have Dr. Denis Mukwege with us in the studio today, but given the world situation due to the pandemic, he could not make it here. But we hope you enjoyed the interview. Coming up, it's time now for me to announce our second keynote speaker. From 2004 until 2007, he was the president of the European Parliament, and in 2018, he became the Minister of Foreign Affairs to the European Union and Cooperation in Spain. He is the High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and the Commission Vice President in charge of coordinating the external action of the European Union. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome His Excellency Josep Borrell.
Hello. Do you see me? No.
No.
And now? Now?
Yes.
Okay.
Welcome, Your
Perfect.
Excellency.
You know, I am at home, confined due to the coronavirus, but I am going to use this opportunity to say everybody that I am okay, that I was negative coming back from Africa. I spent some days in Ethiopia, but one of the members of my team was positive. So although I was negative, I decided to spend some days in quarantine until the second test. But I use this opportunity to tell everybody that don't worry for me. I am very well, no symptoms, negative, but it shows that the coronavirus is still around us. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you to the group of Socialists and Democrats for organizing this Africa Week. It's the fourth time. I think it's very timely because Africa is very high in our agenda, and it brings us together, even in COVID times. And I'm always full of very interesting speakers and cultural events. This meeting is a very, very important one for Africa, for the European Union relationship with Africa. Do you see me well? Is the screen okay?
Yes?
It's okay, no? Well, I was saying that I am very honored to share this high-level session with the Sakharov Prize and Nobel Prize laureate, Dr. Mukwege. His efforts to end the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war on armed conflicts, his dedication for victims of sexual violence, and his fight against impunity for such crimes are very much inspiring for all of us. The time is limited, I know. Sorry for spending time talking about myself. So let me concentrate on a few key messages as High Representative and Vice President of the Commission, who is working hard together with my fellow commissioners, Urpilainen and Lenarčič, to prepare the next European African Summit, which has been delayed due to coronavirus. But we expect to have a lot of deliverables to concrete our partnership with Africa. This is, for me, the relationship between the European Union and Africa, one of the rare cases where the word strategic that we use a lot is justified. The future of our partnership matters and is something that we can really shape together through common choices. It's over the time when we said we have a strategy for Africa. Now we have to say we share a common strategy, the Europeans and the Africans, all together. Where people go is a reflection of their priorities. Just to say that this year I have already been twice in the African continent, in spite of the coronavirus and all the restrictions. And I'm intending to go back next month to the North of Africa countries and to the Sahelian countries, which are, as you know, in quite an important trouble. When I'm back from a 3-day visit to the African Union in Ethiopia, together with my colleague Lenarčič, we were there with a humanitarian air bridge flight. And last week we handed over a third and last batch of 1.4 million COVID test kits to the African Center for Disease Control. It was a concrete and visible example of European solidarity in our joint fight against this common enemy. In total, over 8 billion has been mobilized for sub-Saharan Africa by the European Union and its member states through our Team Europe approach, putting together the European Union institutions and the member states. 2 euro billions. Well, it's not enough. I know very much that it's far away from what is needed, but it has been a big effort for us just at the moment where we are reaching the last months or weeks of our financial perspective and the drawers are empty. So let's hope that the next financial perspective will give more resources and capabilities to continue engaging with Africa. This is just the beginning of a long road. Unfortunately, the economics fallout will be so huge that we will need much more. I am very much worried by the economic consequences of the pandemic in Africa and in Europe. But in Africa, the economic consequences will be bigger than the health consequences themselves. The constraints to mobility, the limitations to economic activity, the difficulties of the transportation of goods will unhappily produce more suffering and more dead people than the disease itself. And the economic consequences of the pandemics will be lasting. So we have to reinforce our capacity of working together to overcome this crisis. To start with, we have to talk about debt relief and not just about freezing of debt payments. We have to go further, and it has to be agreed. This will require international mobilization, including China, to play a full role at the level of the international community. In Africa, we have the paradox that the 6 of the 10 more quickly growing countries, more dynamic economies, 6 out of 10 are African economies. But at the same time, 36 most weakened countries in the world are also in Africa. So it's a very heterogeneous continent. And all of them will be affected, but for most, if we don't give a debt relief, as I said, much more than just freezing payments, we're going to go into a crisis of external debt. And this we cannot afford. So that's what we are calling from the European Union for our international efforts for debt relief for the most vulnerable countries. But we also have to look after the pandemics. One day or another, the pandemic will be over. All pandemics in the humankind history. I was in Addis and I had a long discussion with our partners on how we can step our partnership, making it more ambitious and more political, more geared towards the future. Africa is a young and dynamic continent. We look at Africa most of the time with the lenses of migration, and we look at that as a danger. But Africa is much more than migrants towards Europe. In fact, the most important part of migration takes place inside the African countries themselves. Migration is inter-African dynamic. And we have to help some of the countries who receive the most important part of this migration to be able to cope with it. I noticed that things are changing in Africa. People are much better, much self-confident. They believe more in their future. The young people are much better prepared. And if we want to work together with Africa to promote growth on both continents, this growth has to be more green, more digital, and mainly more equal. I know that when you talk about green and digital, you talk about green and digital in a refugees camp in the Somalian border. It's a little bit strange because for these people, green and digital doesn't mean the same thing as for us. But it's not a luxury. It's not a top-up coming from the Western world. We need to make Africa engage on the new wave of economic development, leaping forward and maybe jumping one of the stages of development that you don't know to go step by step on the same way that we did. You can leap forward and to go directly to the next dynamics that digital revolution is going to create, and also to take into account the big potential of Africa on renewables, hydrogen, solar, wind, hydro. Africa has everything in order to engage with the green revolution. And also the enterprises. The role of young people and women is going to be very important. And Africa is a young continent. It has one of the rare resources in the world, young people. Here in Europe, young people is a rare resource because we don't reproduce ourselves. And we need migration also, in spite of everything. We need to accept in our social fabric people coming from Africa. And the products that people are producing in Africa, we cannot refuse them both at the same time, people and the products they produce, one thing or another. This is the complementarity we have to look for. In the field of digital, it's funny to see that Africa has a number of very exciting entrepreneurs. Also on green technologies, there are enormous opportunities, as I said, in solar, biomass, hydroelectricity. Just imagine the rivers in Africa, the incredible potential they have. And we have to support this initiative and bring them to scale. Have to explain that the European Union Green Deal we are promoting worldwide is not a hidden form of protectionism. Sometimes it can be perceived as this. No, come on, you say about green, but in fact, what do you want to have a barrier to our products? No, it's not about this. It should be perceived as a new model of economic growth, more sustainable, designed to turn climate and environmental challenges into opportunities, trying to do it in a just and inclusive way. Why the goal is to support Africa to avoid some of our past mistakes. We did a lot. And we cannot afford that the African development is just a repetition, step by step, of the same path that we have followed. No. Fighting poverty, including improving the quality of life, and while protecting the planet. This is the real challenge. Allow me to make a couple of last final points. First, in the world at large, there is a battle of narrative and socioeconomic systems fighting each other to show to the people who is the most performant, who is the best one, in order to be able to face the challenges of the 21st century. And a big strategic question is what future model of society will Africa choose? One based on sustainable development, solidarity and human rights, or a different, more authoritarian models? And about it, there is a big battle of narrative, trying to present each of these rival systems as the best one and look at the results of the fighting against pandemia, each one will claim. And second, multilateralism is in crisis, and we see growing trend of countries playing power politics. Because the alternative to multilateralism is just the rule of the stronger. Power politics. I am the stronger, I impose my rule. And Africans and Europeans, we have a massive shared interest in protecting the rules-based international order. I know this is not a very sexy expression, rules-based international order. America first, or give me back control, looks better, looks more moving to the people. But there are bad messages. Rules-based international order, and avoid the drift into might makes right. The power makes the law. I am powerful, I impose my view of the world. Europe and Africa make up more than 40% of the United Nations membership, more than 40% altogether. So our collective weight is real and can change the course of action at the global level. This is the thought I would like to share with you. Thank you very much for your time, for your attention. It has been an honor to join this discussion. Congratulations once again for this initiative and best wishes for the rest of this Socialist and Democrat African Week. And believe me, this coming year, should be the African year for the European Union. The virus has delayed. It was supposed to be the 2020. It will be the 2021. And we have to engage more with African people, civil society, ONGs, not only governments, with the rich and dynamic society that Africa presents to the world. Not being afraid of what some people call the demographic bomb of Africa. It's a source of opportunities for all of us. And this has to be done through a shared partnership. This is part of my job. I will do my best. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency Joseph Borrell. Thank you for such an inspiring keynote address. Before we continue the program, I would like now to thank Ms. Perez for making time to be with us this afternoon. As I understood, you have to attend other also important matters. Thank you very much for introducing the topic of this afternoon, and it was great having you. Thank you.
Thank you, all of you.
Thank you. We are continuing our discussion on fighting inequalities. Many international organizations highlight that inequality is on the rise worldwide. The COVID-19 pandemic has worsened this dangerous trend as it deeply impacted the most vulnerable groups. Workers in the informal sector, young people, women, and others have found their livelihoods threatened. There is an urgent need to identify political priorities and solutions in this worsening situation. Fortunately, we are very happy that we have invited an excellent panel of guest speakers to start a conversation about these problems. Let me start by introducing our first guest speaker, Mr. Trevor Saruwaka, a member of the Parliament of Zimbabwe who is joining us online. Mr. Saruwaka, what is your assessment of the world we live in now and the consequences of rising inequality in society? We can't hear you yet.
Hello, can you hear?
Yes.
Can you hear me? No, thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Honorable.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Fine, thank you. And yourself?
I'm all right. Can
Great.
you come again with your question?
What is your assessment of the world we live in now and the consequences of rising inequality in society?
Thank you. It's very unfortunate that we are living in a world where we have failed over time to bridge the gap between the poor and the rich. The divide is going bigger and wider. So there is a very big risk as we move forward that insecurity is going to increase, as was experienced during the COVID problems. The impact on the lower side of the demographics was terrible. We have got people who were affected because they are staying in slums. They don't have any livelihoods. So we have got a very major problem, inequality. But we must deal with it, because that's the way we can rescue this mankind.
Thank you, Mrs. Sarawaka. You are staying with us for the Q&A session, as well. And we also have respondents, youth representative, who are going to ask some questions later on. Our next guest speaker is Ms. Nathalie Yam. She's in Leader Party in Ivory Coast. Good afternoon, Ms. Yam. Welcome. We can't hear you.
Oh.
Bonjour.
Son a été rétabli.
I'm sorry. Now, can you hear us now? Good morning. Welcome. Mrs. Yam, what are the political priorities that we need to follow in order to efficiently fight against inequalities, according to you? Good morning. Thank you very much for asking this question. It's a great pleasure to be here to share my point of view and the opinion of our political party leader, which is a progressive and social party. Our position to the measure we can take to fight against inequality. Also, before the pandemics, before 2020, inequalities were already there in Africa. And at that time, the African government's priorities were firstly the emergence of economies. This is a word that they hold dear. They kept repeating this word, emergency of our economies. Second priority was to invest in physical infrastructure to show, to kind of prove that they managed to instill this economical leap forward by building roads, airports, etc. And their third priority was increasing debts in order to build those roads, accompanied by the corruption, inevitably, and other plagues. When the pandemics came in, well, all those new infrastructures, well, they were shut down, and so the roads were built. However, what we did actually need, that is hospitals, schools, well, they weren't even built. They didn't exist. And so the pandemics showed the incompetencies of the leaders in Africa. That is, they missed what we actually need: competencies, training, education, healthcare, etc. In comparison with Europe, in Europe you choose to have measures for remote teaching, for helping workers to stay at home. In our case, this was completely different. They didn't care about the people. However, they focused on a heightening control, seizing funds that was supposed to be allocated to the fight against the pandemics, curfew, authoritarian measures, and so on and so on. And this left the population without job, without health care, and of course no digitalization either. And unfortunately, the European countries can only be the witnesses, and they also contribute to deepen inequalities. Let me give you an example. Europe shut down its borders to African migrants due to the COVID pandemics, but opened its border to others. And so people poor have to rely on the obsolete healthcare installations, etc. And so I would say that Europe contributed to it. Hopefully, the African continent was spared by the pandemic. Population were not depleted by the virus. Perhaps the virus doesn't like poverty. However, our population is starving and suffer from chronic diseases due to the lack of healthcare infrastructure, notably. The fact that our government didn't take the necessary actions, hanging on to power, modifying their constitutions, using authoritarian measures, killing, and so forth and so forth. In the next few weeks, we'll have elections in Burkina Faso, Central Africa, Ivory Coast, Ghana, in Nigeria and Tanzania. A lot of electoral deadlines. But in the context of the crisis, we already see tens of dead in Guinea, in Côte d'Ivoire, arrests where the president arrests opponents, women, members of parliament are sent in exile. And you, Europeans, you agree with that. You are actually financing this. Your representatives in our country are supporting our governments instead of being next to the population. In Belarus, you do the right thing. You support the population against authoritarian governments. In Côte d'Ivoire, you do the opposite, providing money to help the leaders organize parties and displaying big fireworks instead of helping the populations who wants an electoral structure that is inclusive, transparent, and smooth. You spent 4.5 billion euros to finance an electoral process that is rejected by the population. Same goes in Sahel, in Libya. Just because you don't want to see coming into your home or into your country people who are fleeing from corruption, from failed states. People in Africa, they aspire to solid and robust democratical structure like you have in Europe. And what are you doing to answer our prayers? You send us soap and products, but you stay quiet when witnessing the acts of our governments. I'll let you know that our people will not accept any longer the behavior that has been adopted by Europe. Why these double standards? Is it linked to the color of our skin or to friendship between our leaders? What's the reason for that? Democracy, freedom, human rights, to abide and to make your promise a reality. These are values held dear by the African population. But when we see the European Union promoting this value everywhere in the world, while at the same time staying silent when they see exactly what's happened in Africa, just to save a few juicy contracts between their corporate or their companies and African, you will have consequences when the time comes. I thank you for providing the opportunity to a female, a woman, an African woman, to express herself here in this panel. Merci.
Très riche, je suis sûre. Une intervention qui, n'est-ce pas, va...
Thank you very much for this intervention. Extremely rich, inspiring, and I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions that will come addressed to you. Please stay with us until the end of the exchange. I'd like to emphasize that we have among us three representatives, three young people. They have compiled a list of questions that we will present to you later on.
First guest speaker of this panel, Mr. Bert Koenders. Mr. Bert Koenders is the Special Envoy of the World Bank for Fragile States and former Dutch Minister of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Koenders, good afternoon and welcome.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Koenders, in what ways do you feel that inequalities impact peace and security?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me for this panel in my own political family. I'm very happy that Europe and the Social Democrats put Africa in the front of the agenda this week. And I've listened to all the colleagues here. I think I'm inspired most by the words of Joseph Borrell saying we need a real strategic partnership with Africa. not just because we see it as an opportunity or a risk or a threat or talking only about migration and terror, but really because we live in a geopolitically difficult world. And I am deeply convinced also after my work for the United Nations in Africa that we have a lot of opportunities together, both in terms of our self-enlightened interest, as well as now in the context of the COVID virus. Let me answer your question quite directly, because I am very concerned about what we see right now in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic. I say that on personal note, but of course I have worked also as special envoy now for the World Bank in the most fragile countries. And it has to be said that the figures are pretty dismal when it comes to poverty and inequality. As we see in our world in Europe, the fault lines between the rich and the poor getting bigger because of COVID. COVID is non-discriminatory, but in the end, those who are most vulnerable in the job market or in terms of age and in terms of other groups, we have an opportunity in Europe for counter-cyclical policies. We can put our government budgets forward. We can borrow on the international markets. And at the moment that in many parts of Africa, actually, we saw a surge of economic opportunities and growth. This is going to be a major complication. And my biggest worry is the growth of the amount of poor in Africa at the moment. I was very, very happy to see a former or colleague from Ivory Coast. I had a great pleasure of working in the Ivory Coast between 2011 and 2013. You see there a similar issue. I mean, we should talk, by the way, on the elections. I'm very happy that came into the discussion, because under the conditions of COVID, it is true that elections will be very difficult in the coming weeks and months. And also, I have concerns about the process in the Ivory Coast. But going back to the economy, we can come back to this. I see real GDP levels per capita drop to 2007 levels. That is our estimation. And if you talk per capita, it doesn't say much about the poor. And as we have a lot of inequality in Europe, you see the same in Africa. In the region that I know best, West Africa, although it's home to 6 of the 10 fastest growing African economies, it has the greatest number of people that live below the poverty line. It's more than 30%. And the top 1% of West Africans own more than everyone else combined in the region. So we see inequality between nations and inside nations. And I'm afraid that COVID and the figures that we see right now, and for time reasons, I won't go to all the projections, but I see that that is going to be a major issue, which will not only have consequences in terms of health, education, the role of women, but also future economic opportunities, but also already immediate results and consequences, which I see especially around conflict and around food. And I think everybody who follows the news sees these risks for international food markets because of the logistical constraints. And I see also that some of the real needs that are in Africa immediately, first things first, are around food production, logistics, and reaching the poor with less purchasing power. There's much to be said about it, but let me say that maybe there are a few things that I would just mention in terms of priorities for Europe and for all of us, Africans and Europeans alike, in that context of inequality within nations and between nations. First things first is the vaccine. I'm very happy that Europe is working on that. The European Union is working on that. My own organization now is also putting, I think, $12 billion to make sure the vaccine will be accessible to all, but I'm not optimistic yet. I think, this is typically something of the weakest link, is a public international good. So I'm worried about that. I think much more should be done. As Joseph Borrell was talking about the lack of multilateralism, here's a fight for who gets injected first. Talking about inequality. The second is, I won't repeat that, but I agree very much what has been said on debt relief. Debt relief means that you pay money back to your creditors at the moment that you should pay it now on health, education, conflict reduction. And therefore, I think today we have the meeting of the G20 in Washington, when there is the annual meeting. I'm afraid it's too shallow. It's only till the end for the next 6 months, and it doesn't involve, so far as I can see, but the decisions are being made today, hedge funds and private creditors, and as you know, also China is now the biggest debtor or creditor to Africa. Also, that's important, as we see, for instance, in the example of Zambia, that pressure is on all creditors to make sure this debt relief is there. Otherwise, we go to something that we had 20 years ago, and I had hoped that we could have overcome this debt crisis. Thirdly, the funding of the World Food Programme, for the reasons I mentioned. This is all first things first. But the key is, of course, in a moment of globalization, as they call it nicely, that the interests of Europe and Africa are correspondent also in the economy. And it requires, I think, for us in Europe, looking again at our trade relationships, of course, with the EPAs and the follow-up to that, everything but arms. It requires also asset recovery and really working with our banks, because if you talk about inequality in Africa and between Africa and Europe, it's always two sides. And asset recovery, tax policy play a major role in the coherence that we have agreed upon between the European Union and Africa, and by the way, in many of the international agreements in the context of the United Nations. Last 2 points, not to take too much time, is on the flow of capital to Africa. Unfortunately, this is again going to be an issue because of all the predictions that we see for COVID and the consequences. And there's a lot of insecurity there. Let's be open about that. It's not preordained. And you see in different countries that the leadership and the cooperation with others works out in different ways. But if I see the reduction of remittances, the issue of commodity markets, and how this works out in different countries, for me, it's very clear that with the figures we see right now, we see a very high risk for the economic reconstruction and recovery in in Africa. And my two emphases would be, if you want to reduce inequality, work on jobs, agricultural transformation, digital, electricity, all these kind of things that can be done. Make your efforts on fragile states, because there the poverty is still the biggest. And I think we need to do much more in thinking through how that works, although we have thought that we knew how to do that in Africa, but still, as you see in some of the countries that my predecessor or the speaker before me was speaking about, that's still very necessary. And last but not least, in the whole area of foreign policy and conflict, it's very difficult to say how this would work out, COVID in conflict. But with an economic crisis, that's for sure, and increasing poverty and an enormous emancipation of a young generation of women, like we've seen in Sudan, it's really important how we can work together for those who do not want to stay ready to just support what they see around them, but want a new wave of cooperation within Africa and between Africa and the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Koenders. You are also staying with us for the Q&A session. Also joining us this afternoon is Ms. Ruka Sanusi. She's the Executive Director of the Ghana Climate Innovation Center. Good afternoon, Ms. Sanusi.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Good afternoon.
Okay, wonderful. Good afternoon,
Ms. Sanusi, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ms. Sanusi, what is your assessment of the connection between climate and inequality? And in what way is it possible to pursue sustainable and inclusive growth at the same time?
First of all, let me just start by sending my personal thanks to the organizers of this convening for inviting me and my organization, the Ghana Climate Innovation Center, to contribute to the discussion this afternoon. You asked about the connections, climate change, and with maybe the inequalities and all of that. My contribution is actually going to be brief, but I hope it will challenge or enable participants to consider the socio-political and economic inequalities from a perspective that they may not have considered it before. And that viewpoint is from the viewpoint of small and growing businesses, and especially SMEs who have climate innovation, entrepreneurs who are spearheading the transition to a low carbon economy. If I just use the example of Ghana, SMEs actually represent 85% of the business sector. And they contribute significantly to Ghana's GDP. I can hear it echoes, that's why I'm pausing. Is there a problem with the audio?
Ms. Sanusi, we can't hear you really well. There is some crack on the line.
That's very unfortunate. I can hear you crystal clear. I'm not sure why that is.
Go ahead.
I continue or okay? Yes. So I was just saying that in Ghana, SMEs represent 85% of business activity, and within the context of inequalities, socioeconomically, when you consider the real influences of business activity in the private sector, SMEs are not usually top of mind, right? And that is inequality right there, because top of mind are normally big businesses, large national or global corporations, or well-connected and influential family businesses. Now, and why is there this inequality? Is because small and growing business sector, though they contribute significantly to our GDP, they're individually very small-scale enterprises. They generate minimal revenues and employ a small number of people. So it's easier for the bigger businesses whose billboards we see on our highways and whose adverts we see here on our TVs and radios to be top of mind.
I have to interrupt you again. Could you please turn on your camera on, if that's possible?
My camera is actually on.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what the problem is. It may be a bandwidth problem.
Can I just suggest one thing? I think we're going to try to get you connected again. Meanwhile, I will switch to the next guest speaker and come back to you. Can you hear me? Yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Stanishev. Welcome to this session. Mr. Stanishev is the president of the Party of European Socialists. In your opinion, what are some of the priorities that the political family of European Socialists should pursue in order to address inequalities?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for having the opportunity to join this debate with very interesting speakers. And I would like to salute also the S&D group for the initiative, which is already a tradition. I think it's fourth or fifth year in a row when we have this Africa Week as an excellent platform where progressives from the European Union and from the African continent can discuss our policies, our strategy about Africa, listen to each other, and elaborate next steps which are needed. Well, my biggest concern of what is happening now regarding to the COVID crisis and its consequences is the very rapid increase of inequalities, both in our societies, in every society, and between the countries. Because this crisis sharpened and brought the inequalities to new highs, which we hope to have behind us. And we see that hunger is regaining strength and positions, and healthcare is also under very severe attack by the COVID, and the health systems are very vulnerable, both in the European Union and I guess to a higher level in Africa. And this is something which is very worrying. This is why we need to work together to overcome the health consequences, but also the economic and the social consequences of the COVID crisis. Here in Europe, since March, our socialist family really focused all the efforts to provide a very powerful and timely response. And back in July, with a very substantial role of the Socialist family, the Council adopted a recovery plan, Next Generation EU, which is a powerful tool and which goes in line with our major social priorities, including fighting inequalities and the effort to protect the jobs and the incomes of our citizens. But we have to understand that it's not just a European matter. And today, Africa needs a strong solidarity gestures and actions on behalf of the European Union to support it in the fight with the health crisis and also to support the economic recovery for the continent. Because if you look at the health side of the problem, then probably due to the younger population in Africa, the crisis will have less impact. But the social and economic impact in Africa might be even worse. And we have to be very aware of this and take actions in time. Because there are economists and prognosis that maybe half of the current jobs in Africa are under the corona crisis may be lost. And this is a very substantial threat and a source of inequality and source of troubles, not only economic, but human and political troubles for the whole of the continent. And I think that it is clear, and Josep Borrell already mentioned some of the directions in which we have to work as a union. The first element is debt relief and debt cancellation, because it's of vital importance now for the countries in Africa to have fresh money in order to be able to tackle the health crisis and the economic consequences. Secondly, we need to substantially increase our aid budgets and humanitarian support for Africa, including through the World Food Organization program, because this is extremely important, especially for the poorer parts of the population in Africa and for the poorest countries in Africa. And the European Union has to show that it is able to be adequate and to act in time. And third, we really need a new sustainable investment for Africa, which will provide new jobs, sustainable development based on new economies and new possibilities, for which Africa is rich as a continent. And I think that Borrell already mentioned that we hope that next year will be really the year of Africa for the European Union. And the forthcoming EU-Africa summit should put a solid foundation. Already in the previous years, we, the progressives in Europe, were pressing a lot with some substantial successes, but we need a much broader strategy from now on. Of course, it has first to focus on the first priorities, the fast actions, but also have a stronger long-term impact on the African continent and elaborate it together in dialogue with the African states. I think we are on this right path, but a lot has to be done. This is why I'm so happy to have the chance today also to listen to many interesting speakers and to also absorb new ideas. But you can be assured that us as progressives in the European Union will press on the Union, on the Council especially, to have a very clear strategy, and this strategy to be based on progressive priorities, which is fighting inequality at the first place. Second, providing new opportunities for jobs in Africa through sustainable investment on behalf of the European Union. Then, of course, developing the possibilities of green and sustainable development for the African continent with a substantial role of the European Union to play. And we shall be active in turning these intentions into hopefully a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sanchez, and you're also staying for the Q&A. We are going to try to reconnect Ms. Sanusi, who earlier on was experiencing some technical problems. Ms. Sanusi, are you back online? Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Is it possible to also switch on your camera?
I tried, but I think I actually have bandwidth problems. So I'm sorry about this. Perhaps we could just try with the Q&A because the video is just not working.
Okay, we will do that. Thank you for being understanding. As mentioned earlier on today, we have some youth representative joining us online who are going to ask questions to you, distinguished panel guest speakers. So I assume you are all still connected. The first youth representative I'm going to introduce is Pauline Torhau, former political counselor, EU delegation to Nigeria. Are you there? Ms. Torhau, are you connected?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
I have
yes. So you have
a lot of chats on the line here.
Can you hear us?
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know how young I am. I'm glad you addressed me as a youth representative. But yes, I would like to address a subject matter that weighs in a lot on when it comes to diminishing inequality, and that is education. In this context, I would like to briefly mention 3 points. First, the World Bank report of 2018, which showed that education has enormous benefits, but that we're also in a learning crisis. And access has improved to education a lot, but the students come out of school lacking fundamental skills like reading and mathematics, and that's the status of education today. In a recent study paper from Harvard and the Global Development Center for Global Development, it says that students from wealthy countries have much better exam results, but not only because they come from richer countries, but also because their parents are wealthier. And increased levels of parental income increases the result. And this makes the disadvantages for students from poorer countries even more clear. Thirdly, the access to higher quality education in Africa is limited due to limited resources. The universities have a poor international ranking mainly because of limited resources, thereby not being able to provide higher academic education. So these are enormous challenges. Education is fundamental to economic growth. And I would very much like to ask our panelists how we can make a real change. How do we tackle these? Is this a doomed issue? Or can we actually do something about this? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Torhau. And you are targeting who especially for this question?
Maybe the representative of the World Bank would be relevant in this, since he actually comes from the institution that presented the 2018 report. Thank you.
Thank you. The question is for you, Mr. Koenders. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. Unfortunately, I didn't hear the question at all. I apologize. I tried to follow, but my connection was very bad. So I unfortunately cannot answer a question I didn't hear. I apologize. to be missing.
I think Miss
Yeah.
Torhall was. It's true. The connection was not bad on your side. I think it's more on her side.
Okay.
But she was. I think her question is around how to target challenges for access to good education for young people mainly in foreign countries. She highlighted the difficulties of having students to have access to education during this pandemic. I think that's, in a nutshell, what I just tried to summarize from what she was trying to ask to you.
If I may, I was quoting the World Bank report from 2018 as well, which says that there is a learning crisis.
Yes. Look, I'm not formally talking here on behalf of the World Bank, but I think absolutely. I'm sorry, couldn't hear you, Madam. I apologize. But yes, I think that the two priorities right now. One is the enormous risk to all the children in school in Africa at the moment who are in deficient systems because of the COVID crisis. I think that's pretty serious at the moment, if not the most important priority right now. The second is, I think, on issues around Europe and Africa and students. Yeah, my sense is that we have to go to a much more intelligent policy there than we have right now. I believe very much, when I was myself Minister for International Cooperation for my country, but this is quite some time ago, we tried many different elements, but they get much less support right now in terms of circular migration, about possibilities for students to stay and work for some time in Europe and then maybe go back. All kind of different legal pathways to do this. I see also that some of the programs for exchanges of students have been reduced. And I think even that some of the programs on university cooperation, although they have become more important than before, remain very limited. So to the extent that I don't feel like the best expert of this right now, frankly, but I think these two things are absolute priority: a lost generation in education, in the refugee camps, but also in some of the schools because of the lack of funds, as well as a more modern type of exchange between Europe and Africa on student exchange and circular migration.
Thank you, Mr. Koenders. Thank you, Mr. Hall. I will now switch to our next respondent, Hyacinthe Mesmin Pameswa, youth activist from Bangui, Central African Republic. Good afternoon. Are you connected? Now, I do not get any signal. I will try to switch to the next respondent, Laure Deltilia, President of Socialists Youth Brussels.
Voilà. Merci de me donner la parole.
Thank you for giving me the floor. I hope you can hear me. I am back from Western Africa, and I can see that there is a low adhesion of a population. And population prefer taking the risk of dying from COVID than dying of hunger. And measures that are taken are not very adapted, and they come from a political arbitration. How can we encourage states with the means available to them through international aid, notably, to encourage measures for the poorest, the most precarious population, notably those in rural areas or those working in the informal sector? That's my question. Thank you, Ms. Deltilia. Who are you addressing your question? To the one who would like to answer, but I think that Nathalie Yamb was definitely in this topic. Okay, Ms. Yamb. Oh, there you come. Would you please answer this question? Yes, for sure. Thank you for your question, Laure. how can we encourage states to use aid in order to improve the daily life of population in need? Well, my answer will be quite disruptive. I don't think it is the European Union's role to substitute the African government's work. When the European constructions happened decades ago, you managed in Europe to set up schemes to make sure that those who want to be a member of the European Union, those who want to enter the European Union, needs to have some standards, rule of law, justice, respect of human rights, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, when it comes to international cooperation, aid, so to speak, international aid, so to speak, the European Union is not as careful with whom they're working, they're cooperating, or to whom they're sending the European taxpayers' money. I heard everybody. I am well aware of African problems, as I am facing those all the time, but I don't think it is up to others to come and help us. Our problem is not that we don't know what to do. The problem is that the people who have the willingness to change the system, to highlight investments in human capitals, in schools, in health, in education, access to electricity, because you were talking about students and so on. Indeed, since you closed the borders, it's a bit difficult for students to come and go. But if we had on-site university with a good training, with a quality training, we say, okay, it's not a major problem. I could go to the Abidjan University or Yaoundé University rather than going to Ghent or to Charleroi. But we do not have that. So we are trapped. And I think that what we expect, maybe what you should take into account in your reaction with Africa and not for Africa, is understand that what we expect from you is a support not to help us as population, but to reinforce the democratic pillar on which Europe has been built. If we have democratic mechanisms, if the youth was so much speaking about, feel or know that they are not excluded from the election list, from the choices of the leaders, the project they want to have for Ivory Coast, the way they want to be governed, if they can take part in this democratic process without feeling that whatever they can say is already done, and if they don't agree, they can go to prison, if they can still have hope in the future of their own country, then everything's going to be fine. The first investment we need to make, Laure, is not in roads, it's not in bridges, it is in human capital. And African people know that. There are some who know that. Unfortunately, those who are governing us cannot find any interest in that because people in need give them the impression of being big donors, and the aid that is sent, sometimes in a very sincere way, is systematically out of the target. It does not go to the people, does not have people to be out of poverty. And I think you need to hear the message that we heard. You think, you say you have climate issues, climate change issues. That's your problem. Our problem is how on earth are we going to eat at least once a day? So we do not have the same problems. We do not have the same priorities. So indeed, we can make a leap forward. We can maybe avoid all your problems. But I think the basis is to have a well-trained society living in peace, not feeling hungry from morning to night. I think this is the way we can help. It's not just coming and build school or build toilets or bringing bags of rice that is going to change the systems in which we're living. Maybe conditioning the aid that you give to democratic mechanism, conditioning it to some kind of openness, to the freedom, which is your characteristic in Europe, then this will allow us in Africa to move forwards. But we do not need to be infantilized. We need to take our destiny to our hand and to know that throughout the world there are people, there are youth who know what we are going through, and they're putting pressure where they live in order for their government to change the way they relate with Africa. Thank you very much, Ms. Yamb. To stay in this topic, all the speakers so far have talked about this partnership between Europe and Africa, of the perspectives for this cooperation. We talked also about the financing and fundings from international organizations, different international partners. And there is a question coming from the audience. Please let me read it in English.
How do we ensure that financial support sent by international donors reaches the actual people? Alors, comment s'assurer que les financements...
How do we ensure that our financial support that is brought in by the various international institutions, donors, how do we ensure that they reach people in need? This is a...
Je vais commencer par vous, Madame Yamb.
So I'll start with you, Mrs. Young. Well, I don't know if I can provide my opinion on a personal note. Yes, go ahead. Well, today, the mean we can use to exit poverty, the very first option we have before foreign aid is actually the remittances, money sent by migrants back to their home family, money that they sent via Western Union, MoneyGram or other paths. Remittances sent to the family. That's the money that is actually reaching the people a destination. If I send money for school for my little brother, well, my mother collects the money at her village and uses the money to that end. So this is why migration is the major leverage to exit poverty in Africa. Now, how can we change things? I think it should start from our governance. Unfortunately, our institution does not allow our politicians to be accountable. Here, leaders are, what are they? Well, they are like popes, like kings. They are extremely powerful. Nobody even dares to ask him whatever that is. So the leaders in our countries doesn't need any laws. He would govern by decree. How can we make these people accountable? That amounts to being sent to jail or sent to exile or just being arrested or beaten up. So we do need first to change our governments in order to create robust institutions. That's one. And then we have to educate our population in order that they are aware that they have the decision power, not our leaders. Once this is set, then it will be much harder for corruption to take money aside. So it will be easier to reach people in need. Once we have sanctions in place or penalties addressed to leaders who bypass laws, well, that's a way we can avoid leadways, and the result will be that money will arrive to destinations, and in the end we won't need external aid. There won't be any debt anymore. So Africa will have developed, will have freed herself, and we have reached the level that we should be at if only we didn't have all those thieves that are actually governing us. Thank you very much.
how do we ensure that the financial support sent or given by international donors reach the actual people? Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. Look, I mostly agree what has been said by the previous speaker from Abidjan. It's, by the way, one of the most difficult questions. I think it's first of all, as she said, I think it's important. The real development never comes from aid. Aid can only be a catalyst, and it can be a negative or a positive catalyst, depending on how it's given, to whom, under what conditionality, and what is the ownership of the country itself. As Europe is not one nation, and we have differences even on support in Europe, even now on the rule of law in Hungary and other places. Of course, Africa is also not one country. I happen to know the country of the previous speaker pretty well as former special representative of the United Nations there just after the elections in 2011. And I know how difficult it is to do this in the right way. In some countries, sanctions may unfortunately work, but it's externally imposed. It's not necessarily very democratic, but you can say in some countries where there is an enormous corrupt elite that takes away the money from the people, it makes no sense to support that with large funds of money. Doesn't mean there are no possibilities to reach the population. When it comes to humanitarian aid, it has to be impartial and neutral, and is, in my view, always important. I think it worked very well in parts of the Ivory Coast as well. The key comes from trade, investment, remittances, and other areas. And I think the biggest role for the European Union is to have coherence in its policy towards trade, to make sure that there is also the possibility of transformation of products. In Ivory Coast, that's obviously through coffee and cocoa, but should be on many more areas, and it should not be just imported from there, but there should be the possibility also to have what we call for trade, which might be very useful. I think the work on SMEs that we do in the World Bank with the International Finance Corporation, leading also to investments that create directly jobs in disadvantaged regions, helps also to emancipate people and give them a voice. So it's a difficult question. It's in each country different. I think the goal should always be how to reach the poor and be a catalyst for real development. And it's always the ownership of the people themselves. And make this a serious concern in all the efforts that you have. And sometimes that's first things first. I think whatever government you have, in an emergency like COVID, it is important that there is big support quickly on health systems and these kind of things. But obviously, like we did before with debt reduction and the so-called poverty reduction strategy papers, this is always, for whom is the benefit. And aid dependency is never a good thing, should always be reduced, but in a way that helps countries to become stronger in their own position in the world.
Thank you very much, Mr. Koenders. Another question coming in from the live feed. What could we as Europeans do to strengthen democracy and peace? And I would like to encourage Mr. Stanishev also to respond. Maybe that's a good question for you.
Well, I'm looking forward with the EU-Africa Summit. As you heard, Josep Borrell mentioned that especially the progressive commissioners who are responsible for this task are working very hard and hope there will be deliveries. Actually, Europe has always been a soft power. It is not a great military power as the United States or NATO or any other, but its strength is in economic cooperation. Its strength is in securing peace and another attitude. And I think that apart from everything else, we have also our homework to do. Because in order to be useful for Africa, we have to accomplish our domestic tasks, starting with the multi-annual financial framework, which is the budget of the European Union, which is now under discussion. And it was in general approved by the European Council in July, but there are still important elements to discuss between the Council, the European Parliament, and the European Commission. including the issue of rule of law, including some lines in the budget which are important from a policy point of view. And I think it is really vital that we adopt our MFF finally by the end of this year in order to be able to have the financial tools to support Africa first on the COVID emergency and then develop a more strategic cooperation. And I think there is a ground to put some conditionalities on the cooperations between the European Union and Africa, including in different forms of economic cooperation, as it is a case of discussing internally in the Union itself at the moment. Because let's be frank, we are also far from perfect. Even if you look at the issues of democracy and rule of law, now there is this debate in the European Union that we need conditionality in order to protect that the money are going to the population and are not used by authoritarian leaders inside the European Union. That means that if we are successful in implementing it finally in the European Union, I see no obstacles that such conditionality is put in our relations with African governments. It makes sense, and it should be subdued to the interests of developing civil society, democratic processes in every African country. But we also, in order to be on a strong side in this process, to have the means, including the financial means, which is an incentive for progressive reforms also in many African countries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sanchev. Maybe Mr. Saruwaka, any insights or advice or suggestions that you would like to share on how Europe, what Europe can do to strengthen democracy and peace?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you switch on your camera, please?
Yes, it's on.
Yes, we can see you.
Yeah, for sure. There is a lot Europe can do to help Africa play by the rules of democracy. It's very unfortunate that a lot of abuse of the democratic space in Africa has allowed to go on without any punishment to the perpetrators. I speak from the background of being an opposition member in Zimbabwe, where every other rule is probably broken by the regime. And we don't always see the international community frowning upon the behavior of the leadership. It appear sometime back before 2000 or so, there was a lot of effort in trying to speak against rogue governments or leaders that break the rules. But over time, it would appear Europe is now afraid of a backlash, of being accused of advancing maybe colonial interests. We've moved away from colonialism. We're setting up a new partnership with Africa. So my first advice is Europe must not be worried about leaders in Africa who want to raise the race card when it comes to when they are being asked to play by the rules. Rules are rules and they must be respected. So one thing is Europe must not bend its rules to accommodate those that break them. By doing that, I am very positive that will set a very good example. Because I can tell you, I cannot miss this opportunity to talk about the atrocities that are happening in Zimbabwe, where journalists who speak against the excesses of the state are arrested wantonly, where opposition members of parliament are arrested, abducted, abused, and sent to jail. And so for the people of Africa, from countries where there are oppressors in the seats of power, we really need that support from Europe, where rules are broken, then people must pay for it. So for me, it's simple. People must just play by the rules. Europe must not bend its standards to accommodate rogue elements in government. Let's just set high standards, just like we have in Europe for Africa. Because for me, a citizen in Zimbabwe, in Ivory Coast, in Ghana, must enjoy the same rights and freedoms, just like a citizen in Sweden and in any other part of Europe. So our standards for democracy must not be lower for Africa. Let's demand it first, even in our relationships. That's my contribution.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saruwaka. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this high-level political panel. I would like to thank all the speakers for their contribution to making this panel possible. Thank you for your time to all speakers, and thank you for the audience that has been following us. And I would like to invite this audience to stay online as the program continues. At 6, there will be a feminist cultural cafe called The Power of African Feminist Art. Please stay online, and I'm sure that other part of the program will be very interesting, just like this session we just had. Thank you very much for your attention. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Merci.